In all of the tri-state, there's no place quite like it. The dwelling place of a people who came long before. We're speaking to those who've studied it. We do know what this is.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes, that is a pipe.
And those who claim the culture as their own.
I walk on the bones of my ancestors, on the land of my ancestors.
Those ancestors were a tribe of farmers who quite literally shaped this land with their bare hands. This is the story of how these hills came to be and what we can learn from the people who lived here. I'm Lindsay Merwin, you're watching My Hometown, and this is Angel Mounds.
My Hometown is presented by Deaconess. You have a choice. Choose wisely. Choose Deaconess.
Welcome to Angel Mounds State Historic Site. Just a stone's throw from a modern neighborhood, a much, much older one. For archaeologists, these hills and what's been found beneath them are the most tangible traces left of an ancient culture. For me, though, the mounds are still shrouded in mystery, and I can't really tell what I'm looking at. So I'm enlisting the help of those who can.
They had a wall that went 1.5 miles around the outside of it.
Angel Mounds site manager Mike Linderman.
That have Maya-like traits in terms of the art style, especially.
And USI Associate Professor of Anthropology, Michael Strzeski.
What I pulled out here is a lot of pieces of pottery.
They're helping us piece together the lives of the Native American tribe that settled here along the Ohio River around 1000 AD. Today, we know them only as the Mississippians.
These were farming people. They grew corn for the most part, and then they also grew squash, and we have some evidence that they grew beans also. So those are kind of their three major crops, and you need big, wide bottomlands with rich, fertile soils.
And that's exactly what they found here on what's now the southeast side of Evansville. A fertile floodplain where the river soaks the soil, perfect for growing all this corn. But flooding won't explain why the mounds were built. See, the people were very practical, but the mounds also serve a very symbolic purpose as well.
They're a way to elevate up an important person or an important place.
The 11 mounds here are status symbols. The larger the mound you lived on, the more important you were, or at least thought you were in the community. So the biggest mound obviously is where the chief would have lived.
As it happens, we're standing where his huge home would have been, a spot from which he could survey his chiefdom. Now, surrounding the chief's mound, families would have lived in houses like this. Not teepees, not wigwams, but rectangular structures made of wood and a little bit of mud, too. And it's estimated that there were about 200 to 300 houses here at the same time.
People say anywhere from about 500 to even like 3,000 people living there. We're not really sure.
Together, they built 11 mounds, one basket of earth at a time, in the span of about 10 years. A way to glorify their leaders and the spiritual world. Now, the temple would have been on this mound right behind me, a place of worship where the community would gather. But how can we know this? The people never had a writing system, and the white settlers got here years after the Mississippians had already left.
Just about everything we know about them has to come from archaeology, and this is history, and it goes back thousands and thousands of years, but it's completely unwritten.
And the only way to write it now is through artifacts. Some ordinary, some distinctive, all important to telling the story of a people. Who is this guy here?
We refer to him as the Kneeling Man. He was found in 1940 in the Temple Mound, very close to the surface. And we think he was buried there as they were abandoning this location to act as a guardian to watch over the property.
Named after his signature pose and buried facing the rising sun, the Kneeling Man is the most deliberate and unique piece discovered on these grounds. The rest is everything they didn't mind leaving behind.
It was garbage, the Mississippians' garbage.
The vast majority of what we find is worth virtually nothing. In terms of money, monetary value.
Something and nothing at the same time.
Exactly.
That is the irony. Back at USI, Michael's brought out some of the so-called trash that holds the key to Mississippian culture. From gardening tools to cookware.
This is from what's called a salt pan.
To games.
These might have actually been toys for kids or something like that. I don't know for sure. They had a disc-shaped stone that kind of looked like a hockey puck. And you'd roll that on the ground, and there would be a bunch of men with spears, and what you would try to do is you'd try to throw your spear to land where you thought the stone was going to land.
You know, once you get to actually hold some of these artifacts in your hands, that's when you really do start to see this culture from a new perspective. Now, what I'm holding here is actually part of a pipe, much like the Mississippians at Angel Mounds would have used to take a little smoke break. And even though it's extremely, extremely old, it's still in pretty good condition.
That's really what kind of the bread and butter of archaeology. That's the information that we use to reconstruct how people lived. They eat a meal, they eat a deer or a turkey or something, they throw the bones in a pit and we dig it up and we can find what they were eating. They break some pottery, we know what kind of pottery they made, and maybe we can reconstruct what that pottery was used for.
They found a huge pot about 4 years ago still sitting upright on the floor of the house where it had been left, and that was cool enough, but once they cleaned the inside of it out, there was still remnants of some kind of food in the bottom of it.
Incredible finds that explain what they ate, how they lived, and even when they might have left. According to carbon dating, the tribe abandoned the site around 1450.
The bottom line is they probably just wore the place out, and they weren't getting what they needed off of it. They had cleared the woods from miles around here for firewood and for house building and the wall and construction.
The woods became farther and farther and farther away, and when they wanted to hunt too, they didn't have domestic animals other than dogs, and when they needed to hunt, they had to go farther and farther and farther away to do it.
A move of necessity after calling Angel Mounds home for 350 years. For an archaeologist, piecing together that unwritten era is at once frustrating and fascinating.
I think the real thrill in archaeology is kind of creating a story or putting it all together, the past, out of this little bits and pieces of the past. You reconstruct something that makes some sense.
Broken pieces that, when put together, complete the puzzle of the past.
Of course, you'd like to know everything, but...
Coming up on My Hometown.
They just gave me a shovel and I just dug. That's about all I did.
Hundreds of workers turn up millions of artifacts when Angel Mounds becomes a WPA site. We hear stories from the group's youngest member when we come back. Angel Mounds is a place as ethereal as its name, though the story behind it isn't quite so romantic. Hundreds of years after the Mississippians abandoned the site, a family with the last name of Angel swooped in and started farming in the mid-1800s.
Actually, by the time Lilly bought it, it was owned by the Grimm family, but he wants to go see the Grimm Mounds.
That sounds a little mysterious. Mike's referring to Eli Lilly, the pharmaceutical company's famous founder. And things would have been grim for the site had it not been for Lilly, who first toured the site in 1931.
Lilly just fell in love with the place, and it was always forefront in his thinking at all times. And he tried to make an effort in the mid-1930s to get the local businesses to pitch in and help him buy the farms.
They donated just $127. So the multimillionaire paid out of pocket to protect the mounds, buying up property for the Indiana Historical Society in 1938, and paving the way for Indiana's most famous archaeologist to explore it, Dr. Glenn Black.
The goal of the Indiana Historical Society, of course, is to reconstruct the history of the state. And the history of the state cannot be reconstructed without knowing the prehistory as well.
In '38, Black and Lilly got the green light they'd need to achieve that goal, approval from the Works Progress Administration. In the midst of the Depression, this historic site became a work site for hundreds in Evansville who needed jobs.
They started up with 277 men on the grounds, and they worked for 37 months excavating and cataloging the artifacts, and they uncovered about 2.3 million artifacts in that period of time, which is still the bulk of all of our collections.
And, well, history's a good thing.
Evansville resident Tom Boyd was one of those men. Do you think you're probably one of the youngest guys in that group?
I was the youngest guy.
Now that he's a few years older,
94. You get a bang out of that.
Tom's memories of Angel Mounds are sparse. After all, he was just 15 when he dropped out of high school and went to work.
I left it not because to go to work, but to help the family. But then while I was off from high school, well, the WPA come up and I went to work on it. Mom and my sister and myself. During the Depression, it was just work. It was a living.
Among other public works projects, Tom made that living on one of the largest WPA archaeological digs in the country.
They just gave me a shovel and I just dug. That's about all I did. But later on, I worked on what they uncovered, like remains, artifacts, and one thing or another. And I used a little brush, and a pick.
With Dr. Black at the helm, Tom and those few hundred others excavated the Temple Mound and 3 more acres on the property.
How deep do you dig?
We dig to undisturbed soil, wherever that may be. Normally, there is a debris level over the entire site, which varies in depth from 1 foot to 3 feet. And we go down from the surface of the ground to undisturbed soil, no matter how deep it may take us.
What they found took them back to an ancient landscape. Signs of an exterior wall, presumably to keep out other tribes, now recreated in concrete. Post holes marking where houses would have stood. A painstaking process mapped out square by square.
Using little 4-inch pointing trowels, we remove the soils from within each 10-foot block by 4/10 foot levels, keeping all of the material separated by levels and blocks.
You had to be easy digging the mounds out. When you dig them out, you don't want to ruin what you find.
Everything they dug up, they had to document carefully, and they kept all of that under lock and key in one of these storehouses. This is actually one that's left over from that archaeological dig and the only one left on this property. Between 1939 and 1942, they found things as small as broken pottery, as significant as the Neely Man, and as sensitive as human remains. 36 burials discovered and cataloged in the same fashion as artifacts.
No one was against it. I mean, there was no uproar about it or anything. We could dig the mound, and dig his remains up.
Though an acceptable practice at the time, attitudes toward excavating remains are now much more delicate.
You were disturbing the Native Americans, and the Native Americans were upset about it, which is understanding. I mean, after all, it's their people. And so, yeah, I think about that. And I know now that if you find something, you report. You don't dig it up. You just let it lay and report it. And they come and investigate.
Today, the grounds of Angel Mounds aren't nearly as active. In 1942, America's entrance into World War II brought an end to the WPA dig, and most of the workers, including Tom, joined the service. It wasn't really until 1945, when Dr. Black partnered with IU to launch a field school, that excavations began again. Today, IU still controls everything from the ground down, but Dr. Black's contributions haven't been forgotten.
Mr. Black was really interested, really a good man. I mean, he liked his job, and I know he liked his job because he was there quite a while.
Once he got to Angel, this was his baby from 39 until his death. This was his whole life.
Now with plans to recreate the WPA's archaeological lab on the site, Angel Mounds will capture not one, but 2 important eras in American history.
I found it very interesting. Well, of course, I was young yet, but in fact, I find it more interesting now. You know, the history and Native Americans, and one thing and another. Not only just Native Americans, but, well, the world in general.
A project that changed a young man's perspective during a changing time. Coming up next on My Hometown.
Being Aztec, these are probably my relatives here.
From a place of pain to a place of peace, a USI student shares what makes Angel Mounds something sacred. The bright colors, the beautiful costumes, the beat of the drum. These are the sights and sounds of Native American Days, a tradition here at Angel Mounds for 30 years. But spirited performances aren't quite enough to sum up the spirit of a people.
All the good things that we offer, and I offer to you my hair. This is really a sacred place right here. This in itself is a sacred place.
Sometimes that spirit comes through in a quiet prayer.
This place here should be blessed and that it's a good place. Thank you for hearing me, Creator. Thank you. Thank you.
For Maria Catalina Mulford, every visit to Angel Mounds must come with a blessing for this place and for her ancestors.
I'm Nedney Apache the same people as Geronimo. I'm Tarahumara, and from the people of Montezuma.
What would you
I
call
prefer to
yourself?
be called Indian.
Just Indian.
I'm an Indian woman.
A native of El Paso, Texas, Maria spent a lifetime coming to terms with what that means.
The light-skinned ones were preferred because I'm one of the few about the only dark skin in my family. All my other sisters are light-skinned and, they're pretty, but I came out an Indian.
An identity complex and rich, marked by a different way of seeing the world.
Everything falls into the categories of the standing tall, winged ones, the rude and the green, the four-legged, the creepy crawlies, the gill and the fin, and the two-legged. That's the whole universe right there, earth and water, fire, sky.
A culture so often misunderstood.
They only recognize the Aztecs as dead. They don't think we're still alive. Somebody once told me, oh, reservations, that's like Dolly World, right? Yeah. That's when we decided we had to educate.
Which is part of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy or the Iroquois Confederacy.
And you can't talk about reservations and Indians without bringing ugliness. Because, our history, it's there. It still exists.
For Maria, that ugliness once existed here at Angel Mounds. Now a place of peace, it was once a place of pain when she first visited the site in the 1970s.
I was really upset and I wouldn't come back, and I became their mortal enemy because it was just an in situ archaeological dig.
The museum's recreation of the excavated site struck a nerve, and it would be decades before she returned. But when faced with a personal struggle, Maria came back to a place very different than the one she'd known.
I came here and it was like this, and I was just like thrown back and just shocked, and I walked around and it was calmer. Where the dig used to be, now there's a family life, and so they've done a really good job of representing the Indians better than just skeletons in the ground.
For Maria, that's the answer to the age-old friction between cultures, our tendency to dig for answers in the ground instead of asking the living.
They don't need to dig us up anymore. There's nothing more to be learned. We're not just bones, we're just not powwow dancers, I make baskets and everything, but that's not all I am. I'm a college-educated woman.
A Maya altar is kind of a drum-shaped piece of stone like this that's set into the ground.
Years later, she's a student in Michael Strzelecki's class, studying the very subject that angered her for years.
Sun Tzu says, keep your enemy close to you and learn all you can from them. So I'm taking archaeology, anthropology. I want to get an education, learn the liberal arts, so that I can introduce the liberal arts to our people.
In a personal quest to learn a new language while still honoring her heritage, she somehow found a balance between both.
Once I did the research and realized and started really studying and trying to find out what this was all about, I realized, being Aztec, these are probably my relatives here.
For Maria, that makes every colorful celebration at Angel Mounds more meaningful.
In my hair. And I ask you please to bless him and to bless her.
And it makes every prayer deeply personal.
And I would like to see all of us come together like we did the reburial. All the Indian people came together and set up
One
a
step
reburial.
on her journey from a place of pain to a place of peace. Even as the city of Evansville has grown up around Angel Mounds, so much of this site still feels kind of wild and untouched, much like it would have looked when the Mississippians were living here hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years ago. It's kind of cool to come here, make the connection with that culture, connect with nature. It's just a really peaceful place to spend the day. For My Hometown, I'm Lindsay Merwin. Thanks for watching.
My Hometown was presented by Deaconess. You have a choice. Choose wisely. Choose Deaconess.